I'm really excited for this panel. It's a panel that I couldn't have put together any better. I love these three speakers. I love our moderator. I'm really excited for you guys to hear their insights. So I'm going to stop talking and just turn it over to them.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. Thank you guys all for being here. We're going to try to keep you awake. I know it's just after lunch. We're talking about the global healthcare market and how to get that to, get our products to market. And so medical device companies really need to employ strategies that are realistic, based upon needs and resources and infrastructure that are in the markets in which we're serving. And so we're just going to be talking about some of our experiences in the global healthcare space all around the world. And so on the app and online, you have our bios, so I'm not going to go into it, even though they are, all three of these guys, incredibly impressive. But kind of as a summary, we're all entrepreneurs. We're global citizens that are focused on global solutions in the healthcare market. We're innovators in new technologies. And it's also, we're working with a lot of a social focus, so I like to call us social entrepreneurs. And that really means that we're working towards solutions that create an impact to both society along with making money, because both of them are really important. So just as a quick intro, the healthcare market in the last 5 to 10 years has really started to focus outside of the developed world, which is US, Europe, and Japan, and into the developing world, which is more or less the rest of the world. And there's huge potential in these areas. 97% of the population growth in the last 10 to 20 years is in the developing world. And quite honestly, that's going to extend for the foreseeable future. Developing world economies have grown 2 times what the developed world economies have been growing at. And that just means better economies, more money is available for healthcare and solutions and better health. So huge opportunities for all of us. And the last fact I'll leave you with is that the average life expectancy for the developing world has recently increased from 52 years old, which was in 1970, to 71 years old today. People are living longer. They're beating communicable diseases, and now non-communicable diseases are becoming an issue. And these are problems of longevity, such as cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. So I'm really excited to be here with the panelists. And so we're going to jump right into questions. And then in the middle of everything, we're going to ask you guys for some questions, because we'd really like to hear your thoughts on it and to get, what you want to hear out of this as well. So I'll kick this off just to start. So what are some of the unique aspects, risks, difficulties of approaching and solving healthcare challenges, like on a global context? What do you guys think? Anybody can jump in.
I'm happy to jump in. So again, my name is Chris Olson. I'm based right up the road here at Massachusetts General Hospital and run an organization called CAMTech, or the Consortium for Affordable Medical Technology. And we identify, source, and accelerate medical solutions initially in low and middle income countries, and increasingly right here in our own backyard, partly from the lessons we've learned overseas. One of the biggest unique challenges that I've seen in low resource settings is, even as we've been identifying nascent entrepreneurs who even understand their local context, it's really getting into their business modeling, where oftentimes you see that as the last part of what they're addressing, and there's often this notion that and then the government is going to buy this and distribute it, and one thing we've really been encouraging of people and our most innovative entrepreneurs have seen this, that is the last strategy that's going to keep you alive in 5 years, because governments are not early adopters. And the other challenge is that people will look at a market and go, oh, 17.8% of the planet lives in India. What an enormous market. But with 29 states, there's really at least 29 markets, and there's even more than that. And so I think really understanding who your local partners are and who is going to be adopting and ultimately paying for and using the devices is really important as people come up with a solution that they think is a solution, but if it doesn't get out there, it really doesn't impact health at all.
That's a great point, Chris. I'll jump in just briefly. So my name's James Fox. I'm coming from Goddard. We're a product development firm. We work mechanical engineering and industrial design, and there's a chunk of our work that is global healthcare focused. Building on that idea of local context, I'm thinking about how we go through a product development process for anything, and especially products, devices that are focused on developing markets, what that means for phase zero, defining requirements for a product, and how does it tie into both the business model and the context, everything, language, culture, differences in regulatory requirements, all those aspects that drive what will ultimately become technical requirements for products. That early stage stuff is so critical and often translates into a challenge.
Thank you. My name is Wissam Brigi. I'm the CEO of Brigi Scientific, and I can't really agree more. I'll give you an example. Recently, in a trip to China, I got into a building, and the building, the elevator, it was 1, 2, 3, 3A, 5, 6, 7, and goes. And I was looking at it, and I asked my friend, and I said, "Oh, there's a gym on 3A?" And he looked at me and was like, "No, this is my apartment here." And I was like, "Where is 4?" And he said, "Oh, nobody would buy an apartment in number 4. It's a bad number." And I looked at it as like, I love number 4. And we built, infant incubators. It's funny, put things on it. And probably I would put number 4, whatever reason is. So nobody gonna use it. So understanding, the culture, really understanding your market in depth, and not in one time. You have to go several times back to really, because that's, it's a dynamic market. It's very different from our markets. Our markets, literally the challenges are set. You have rules, regulations, everything set. You go, you look at it, and you can actually work through, piece of paper. In the developing world's market, it's very different. It's very dynamic, and there's a lot of things you need to understand. So that's why I guess, the probably just to say is that understand, the culture, understand your market, to really be successful.
Mm-hmm. So, we're talking about the culture and things like that. And besides the obvious regulatory risk, are there some other risks that you guys can identify of getting our products to market?
Absolutely, yeah. I'll give you another example. So a couple of years ago, I was working on a medical device, diagnostic device, targeting rural use in Central America. We're thinking about, it's a optical product, a need for high level of accuracy, and the risk there in operating in an environment that is humid, that is outside, sources of noise, drivers for technical issues in the accuracy of that device are just tremendous, right? And the risk there is all in just the variety of usage environments where it might play out. Or important to consider that early and address those things as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's great. What about the competitive landscape? So how do you think that's going to change in the next 10 years? And how do you imagine we can all stay competitive in the market?
Take a step at this. Partnerships really are very important into the competitive markets and into this, the global market. And what I mean by partnerships is really, we understand our, local markets where, you go to an insurance company or a hospital, and then you can actually, sell your product and get your business. In the challenge in the developing countries is very different. It's actually, it's not a hospital because there's no chain that you can actually work with. It's just individual hospitals. Or, it's a government, which actually I think goes back to a point you said, governments probably it's not the, place to go. Where in my experience, I found, government actually was very important because they are paying the bills. They are actually supplying all these hospitals, and they're going to make a decision eventually who would use it. The issue is now how to actually convince the government and work, with your local market to accept that technology. And I think this is a very important point.
And I'll add to that as well. I totally agree with engaging government early on, early and often, and trying to talk to both the frontline providers and private sector as well as government, both if there's a nascent regulatory strategy, but also with the Ministry of Health and say, for example, in Uganda, and one of the things that I think is going to change in the next few years is the number of endogenously developed medical devices. And so I think there's probably a lot of experience in the room, but I really encourage people to be in it for the long haul and developing partners in those countries, because thus far the market is still really dominated by multinational corporations. Still produce, for medical devices is 70 to 80% of the Indian market. Where we work in Uganda, it's much higher. But what's changing there is, even though it's just a fraction of the U.S. medical device market, right? It's even if it grows as expected at a really impressive CAGR of almost 10%. So it's gone from about a $10.4 billion market up to, it's expected to be 70 some billion. Again, we're talking about 17% of the population. That I think a lot of what's going to change is people that really understand the context and are developing devices that are not only developed for the local context and not only thinking about value of health outcomes over cost. When we think about cost, I think that the really competitive groups are going to be the ones that think not only of cost to buy, but cost to own, and thinking about local maintenance and serviceability of those devices, and think also about innovative business models where the upfront cost might be low and there's more a pay-as-you-go model for capital equipment.
So
Yeah,
I'll jump on that. So I'm just curious in the room, like show of hands, how many people are aware of a company, startup, large company that's working in global healthcare today, be it Boston-based or somewhere else in the States? Seeing some shy folks in the room. A couple, okay. So it's interesting, I think, that this area in particular, there's been a surge in activity. You're talking about a dominance of folks that are in the U.S. that are thinking about global application for their products. And how does that sync up to that endogenous development and partnership? It's amazing. I mean, talk about the next 10 years, look at the past 10 years. Like it's incredible the progress that we've seen and interest in this area, and I think that will continue.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting. We got a couple proposals from two different governments in Central and South America. And it came actually from the Ministry of Health, and they said, can you bring your technology, this infant incubator to our country. And part of the discussion, and this is where you want to actually go and think on the long term how you partner with this. Not only you go with a medical device, you go with a product, and they will be dependent. Which actually what we proposed to create a partnership. And the partnership was basically, instead of us shipping the components from, China or somewhere else, and then, doing the whole work. We said, okay, how about we will do the assembly and part of the manufacturing in your country? And we got a lot of interest. Eventually, they came back and they was like, you know what, we like that idea. Because now we are not only, bringing, a device or a product, we're creating jobs, we're creating skill jobs. And I think that would probably, for us as a company, would ensure that, longevity of actually partnership. And definitely the countries, in the area, surrounding areas, will be interested. And I think that would be very important. If you think you want to actually compete and you want to stay in that market, you really, especially when you are a small company, and hopefully we will stay like that because that's where you are nimble, you can actually do a lot of things. You think of actually partnering with that, region or country to, do at least part of the work, even collaborations, universities, hospitals, and you do some of your R&D, some of the work that you want to do it. You take your knowledge, your experience, and then, you go and share it, with these people. Then you create value. And in turn, these people, they would be interested in your product, and you staying, in their market. And I think that would be a great, competitive.
Yeah, and that's also an innovation, and that's what I know that there's a lot of countries that have started to do that, and they're requiring a certain amount of manufacturing to be done in their own country so that those innovations can then stay into the country and it provides jobs, as opposed to just, importing everything in, because that's not a sustainable solution going forward, nor does it, increase and help the workforce there and keep the knowledge. So, and it's a way of innovation. A lot of times we talk about innovation as you think that has to be a new product and a new technology and things like that. A different way of thinking is also an innovation. And that's something I think on the global context, that's really something that we need to think about, because, what I'm hearing from you guys is that innovation and thinking that we can just take our solutions here from the States and move them somewhere else, it's not going to work. There needs to be some sort of innovation, whether that's innovation in thought process, in manufacturing, in clinical trials, whatever it happens to be, that's innovation. So, I mean, like, what changes do you guys think other changes need to happen more on this global landscape for medical devices?
Yeah. If I could mention one thing
Yeah.
about that, which relates to both that question and the thought of competitive landscape, is I think if we're all in this room and if many of us spend the majority of our time working here, I like when we change the conversation, not to, and I get this often, and I think many of you that work overseas, they're like, oh, that's really nice what you're doing for poor people. And I think that conversation has to change, because there are reasons why preferentially I think we should be wanting to work with partners in low and middle income countries. And so just to outline some of those, I think many of you will have a different set, but the way I think about it is, sure, like, need is the mother of invention, and there's an overwhelming need in these settings, but there's also unique perspectives when providers are seeing really high volumes of patients. Then they can hone in on what is a minimally viable product that would make their day better. And there's also a lack of legacy infrastructures, right? Like, so we are existing in a healthcare environment that was built for how we delivered care in the 1950s and the 60s and the 70s, but it's not necessarily how we should deliver care here. And we can really see leapfrogging of technologies or innovations in these settings that don't necessarily have to follow the pathway to where we got here. And then another thing is just that there's real economic incentives in these settings for value-based design. And so we've seen a number of technologies, which wasn't our goal initially, but that have been co-developed in north-south partnerships or south-south partnerships that had an incredible positioning statement as a target product profile for how we deliver care here. So there's a number, like there's a company that was founded with one device really targeted for the market in India. It's called Koyo Labs, who are marketing this CPAP product that would never be used here. But then they started developing something in India to prevent ventilator-associated pneumonia. So it's called VAP Care and does automatic suctioning and oral hygiene for the patient, just recognizing that they have less nurses often in some of these settings per patient. And it's something that they are now trialing in the United States. And it was because it was built with this notion of value.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I'll jump in. So if you're looking for a good read, Paul Polak wrote a book a few years ago called Business Solutions to Poverty. It's addressing some of these things, right? So looking at profitability in the context of a market that is massive, right? Okay, the constraints are different in how you're developing those products, how you deploy them, but the opportunity there is incredible. And thinking about it from the perspective of we all have limited time and resources, we need to choose where we deploy those and what opportunities we go after. This is an area that certainly is, I think, still not receiving the attention that it probably merits in terms of scale, and there is opportunity there. It's tremendously exciting from that perspective.
I totally agree. It's interesting actually when you look at the market and where you take it from, our own experience and what we know about the market and how you deal with a developing world's market. And people always think about it, and something I really don't like is when they call it, the impact, work or impact investment. And really, in a way, you're telling people this is a charity work. And it's not. It is just like, us, living in probably Boston, with snow and all that. If you design anything for this environment, if you go down to Arizona, it's not going to work. So it is really, just a different environment, whether it was, economic, social, culture, it's just a different one. And unfortunately, we've been cocooned in our thinking, and unfortunately, I think it started even from our education, is that, this is the world, and we don't really even think what is outside that, whereas it's the 99%. And, so it's important for us to actually, when we think, it is not only, when we think about anything, especially in innovation, you have to think outside the box that, if something, just like I always give an example, I said, we designed our incubator, the Nikki, like the old Land Rover. It's basically, a diesel one that goes into, dirt and water, but if I can get it through that, kind of terrains, I can drive it, on a paved road. So let's, think not to design something for a paved road and then, you want to take it out there and get it stuck in the mud. And I think this is where, unfortunately, it's, in general, we start to think always in our innovation, make it complex and very slow, and to the extent that you can actually use it only, within our, close range of areas where we cannot go outside the world. And I think that's very important, the way how to actually take it to the rest of the world.
Is this a place where digital health can start to play a role, and maybe the technology is finally, at a place where it could be used? I mean, is this, and I'm sure, I didn't want to let a panel go not talking about digital health, because I'm sure we all need to talk about it. But now the technology is there, is this a place where some of that can start to play in?
Well, it's interesting because now there's this, great push, which, in a way is justified, with all, the technologies we're coming up with, all these, little things. And if I, recall even in my experience 2 years ago, we were driving in the far end of Honduras, the eastern border, in an area called Gracias Dios. So as you can tell, thank God that we're still alive, I guess, reaching this area. And it is true, we drove on a dirt road for 6 hours, and then we, got into a river that there's no bridge. So we literally had to dive into the water and get to the other side. And then we took a boat for another hour to reach this small village. And there's nothing. I mean, there's definitely no cars because you can't reach actual cars. So there's, a couple bicycles, in the little tiny village. And in the city hall, so they met with us and, the whole thing. And while we're talking, everybody is looking down. So I asked, Dr. Luther, who's, from Honduras with me, and I said, what's going on? I said, oh, you are now on social media. They are taking pictures. And I was like, seriously? This is the middle of nowhere. And when we were designing actually our system, we definitely took the whole, idea of, transferring, information from our system out because, it's not, we were using it in developing countries. And funny enough, I have a great experience. I've visited a lot of places, but still I didn't have a good understanding, of that notion that, people can use, these technologies. And when I came back, I went back to the team. I said, you know what? Scrap what I said. Let's, go back and put, Wi-Fi's, internet, and let's actually use the data. And if it's available, we'll use it. If not, so I think my guess is what's going to happen is that, there's a whole bunch of these technologies, just like any new industry, is going to come to the surface. And then eventually you're going to sift through it. And some of them, they're going to stick. But still, I think going to be very valuable at one point, with the traditional, if we can, marry the two with the traditional work, I think will be very valuable in developing countries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could I mention the digital piece? Because I was more skeptical of it because there's been so much hype about digital health, but it's not really, it's a tool like anything else in illness care and can be used for preventive true health care. But what I've seen, so through our platform, about 20% of the things that have gone through our software, about 60% hardware, and 20% are process-only innovations. And really recently, we've seen really fantastic innovations that are practical, designed for setting with enough connectivity and designed with coders from those settings to be readily usable by the end user. So I'll give one example of one called Prisms, or Preventing Infant Lives Through SMS, and they had studied it really interestingly, where frontline providers, community health workers, have trouble caring for newborns under 28 days, and they were referring all of them, and that's an incredible cost to people. When they did this decision support tool, can work offline, online, and resync up. They not only were cut down the referrals from these centers, but had a trend in their trial towards improved outcomes because these babies were getting treatment for fevers and things at point of care right away, but the referrals went to a fraction of what they were, less than 10%. It was really remarkable, and I think that that sort of solution, which was coded entirely by Ugandan coders, is what we're going to see more and more of.
Well, that's a great point. I mean, I think there's a good example and maybe differentiation as we think about. Again, I was feeling the hype on digital, right? I think there's some aspect of it. It's a tool set. Can I add a feature to a product, and that intrinsically makes it more valuable, and versus something that actually is tied to results and does deliver real value. We think about that a lot when we're looking at product development, laying out a plan, what goes into the appropriate feature set for a product, and is digital appropriate for that? Certainly there are cases clearly where it is, and we've seen a lot where it's not.
Yeah, and I mean, from my experience, I do a lot of work in Africa and the developing world for sure. And so in Tanzania, the local developers have developed an app that is able to screen for cervical cancer through using the camera through your phone. And it actually gives certain markers and ratings, and to say like, yeah, you need to be treated immediately. You have this stage of this, so that the woman who's still in the clinic can actually be treated immediately within 5 minutes, as opposed to having to go home, and it's very cultural, going home and asking your husband, and he's not going to let you come back to the hospital. This woman's now, her life is going to be saved because it was an instant result, and she can be treated. And I think without that, and there's great points to digital, and then We just need to think about really also on the device side, on the treatment side, how we can start interfacing the digital, because there's a lot of focus on digital for preventative and for detection, but like we haven't gotten there so much on the treatment of some of these diseases, and it's something that I think we should start thinking about. I wanted to make the pivot to actually getting to market, and here's one topic that we all wanted to talk about. You know, it's really hard to get anything to market, even if you're the most well-funded company in the best country in the world. So, like, what's one of the strategies that you guys have used to penetrate these other world markets?
Well, probably,
Please.
I'm the one, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
you're the one.
It's interesting, you know, definitely still, it's a big challenge for us, you know, as a startup company. You know, you're trying to penetrate this market for infant incubators. And, you know, knowing the market is an immense market and, you know, very much underserved. Most of the countries around the world, developing countries, they have second-hand incubators that most of them don't work, and we've seen it over and over again. And so when we develop the whole system, you know, our incubators where there is, you know, heat, ventilation, phototherapy, and it's very high tech, it's touch screen, and it has a camera and has Wi-Fi. So this is a very low cost. This is, you know, an incubator that's under $500, where, you know, as a competitor, you know, you're talking with a machine similar, you know, like GE's, which is over $80,000. But then how you penetrate, you know, this market? And we really, you know, try to be very innovative into tackling literally, you know, the people of making decisions, which is, you know, went to the ministers of health. When, you know, and was, you know, in the beginning, a lot of people said, you know, how are you going to actually, as a startup, you'll be able to reach these people and globally? And we said, you know, we'll try. And we did. And it was, you know, just by, I guess, having the plans and eventually end up, you know, I was invited to go to Cuba, which I didn't know that I can come back to the country, but I did. And,
Welcome back.
yeah, well, we met, there was like, you know, this global health conference that there was like 84 countries were attending. And it was, for our surprise, we met with a dozen ministers of health individually. They asked for, you know, to meet with us and sit and try to talk about, you know, the product and how we can bring it to their countries. So then we came back and said, okay, you know, this is great. How will we be able to, you know, to really, you know, have a, you know, piece of that market, you know, encourage people. So as I said, you know, before, what we did, we tried to say, this is not only a product, you know, we would like to bring, you know, our product to you. We'd like to save lives. We're trying to make this available in every small clinic, but at the same time, we're trying to bring with it some socioeconomics, you know, incentives to your country, you know, whether, you know, to, you know, do assembly, whether, you know, light manufacturing. And we started getting, you know, literally a lot of interest to actually send back the other day from, you know, South America, one country, the Minister of Health, she sent me 12 questions. None of them was actually about the machine itself. It was more about how to build, you know, the technology in their country and what kind of things we need to actually do that. So we figured that, you know, something like this, to actually have a partnership, and, you know, a long-term partnership, it probably would be one of the successes that you can actually take your technology and establish it, you know, in a certain country, which eventually, hopefully, will be, you know, replicated to other countries.
You guys got anything?
I'll just mention another strategy, which is very similar. I think it really relies on early relationships and not being someone that's coming out with a ta-da moment, like, I've developed this device and it's for you, but like even co-developing, having people trial it, having your Sentinel users. But the big thing I see is that when the startup or entrepreneurial group, maybe even a small company that's not a startup, want to move into a market, they have to be thinking who's going to buy it and have that threshold of people that will keep them sustainable quickly. There's increasingly some funding. These countries are realizing that local innovation is important. So in India, if many of you know, there's the Biotechnology Innovation Research and Assistance Council, or Industrial Research and Assistance Council called BIRAC. They give some early funding. And so this is great. Now there's even a number of things that are a little bit further down the road, and they meet this valley of death because they haven't yet been thinking of how they're selling. The ones that we've seen move through that pathway and survive are the ones that go out and have paying customers right away and really focus on them. One company called Indra, which is using AI for pathology, recognizing the limited resource of pathology in India. They're based in Bangalore. What they did is recognize that data fidelity is the biggest problem with AI. And so they're an AI company, and they developed an auto stainer, which you're like, okay, an auto slide stainer, we've had those forever. You know, there's a bank of them in the hospital I just left. But what they did is develop one for the local context. So it takes 2 feet of space, which is a limited resource in these labs, and has variable amounts of slides that you can put in each time, and it auto stains these slides, and the quality is so much better. But they started selling that as a way to keep their company going as they were developing their whole slide imaging, high fidelity imaging, and then subsequently their AI analysis of those slides. So those are 3 different products. And I think if people think about what is their early minimally viable product that they get out the door that keeps them moving is really fantastic.
Yeah, I agree.
And necessary.
Yeah, I mean, that product market fit component and of course partnerships. I think coming from a product development side of things, you know, at its most basic, you know, can you create a product that is functional, that works, that is quality? You know, it's amazing what a product that doesn't suck, you know, will do for market penetration, right? I mean, that really makes a difference. So yes, I agree with all those things, but you know, from my background, you know, make it work, right?
Yeah, we're all for products that don't suck. So I wanted to see, as with all these products that don't suck, and how do we get them funded? And are there people that are interested more and more in this global health investment space? And have your investors, if you have investors, you know, from what you guys been seeing, are they asking for something in particular? What do they want to see that's maybe different from a U.S. funding landscape?
I'll mention one company I was just speaking to in Bangalore that, in full disclosure, I have a patent with them, but we relinquished it to them, and they're moving forward. I just had this conversation with them, and I said, well, the VC community is still pretty nascent in a lot of the developing world, and there's just not enough funding, but they are getting some investors into their company. And he said to me, he goes, you know, it's no different than if I'm going to an investor in the United States, or if I'm going to an investor in India. They all want a return, and he's saying, you know, a return in the short-term time horizon of 5 years. Maybe some people are willing to tolerate a little bit longer. But what people are asking for is, well, does it work here? Mm-hmm. And so I think it gets back to devices that don't suck. But
I hope everybody tweeted that one out. Yeah. Just saying.
It's interesting, you know, so as a company, you know, we basically now we are in this stage where, you know, we're looking for more investors, and we have this internal discussion. You know, personally, I'm, you know, probably because I'm not the business guy into all of this, and I tried always to slow down, you know, the begging of the money in a way, because what I see, it became more of pushing companies to do whatever it takes, because I want my returns in 5 years, and I want it 10x. And I think this is, you know, the danger, and I think the lack of good products in well thought products. And this is probably why, you know, we go after, you know, a product that as an innovator, you know, I have few ideas, and some of them actually I could have actually developed something that would go for our market. And I know that the margin or, as a product is much bigger as a market and less headache. But then, I chose to go for a product different that has some impact. And it wasn't the impact just because, I have a good heart. But I know it is, something that people cannot afford, having, a baby that would die in a small clinic or a village because they have to transfer it, 6, 8 hours to, a hospital, the nearest hospital, they can take care of it. And the problem with the investment, this is why I said earlier, about the impact investments. People think that, what, let's do it short, quick, and get our money. You know what, that's where the risk is too. You're gonna actually do that, and then eventually you're gonna end up, probably if you are gonna stick around today, you're gonna hear, how a company will get all these hundreds of millions of dollars, and then there is no product, and everybody lost it. So that one thing. So I think the attitude is that, we need a very quick, satisfying ourselves with a quick return. And so in a sense that, a product for developing countries, it doesn't mean that there is no profit. There is profit. We thought a little innovative. We decided that to solve a lot of medical issues, but it was, a business, eventually it was a good business decision. The housing of the incubator was disposable, so now it became a consumable product. So our product is very inexpensive, and, every week you basically, that disposable housing, the weekly, you can actually take it out and recycle it, and then use a completely sterile new one for a new baby. And now there's no cleaning, no disinfecting, no maintenance, which is a lot of issues that is a problem with even in our hospitals. So how about, developing countries? So that got the interest from the investors, like, oh, okay, so there is profit, with this. So I think, we have to go back and steer the discussion about investment, how we really think about investment. I think this is, probably a long-term kind of thing.
Yeah, and come up with different creative investment models, of which a lot of them are starting to pop up. And, program-related investments, project-related, these are things that are making an impact. They're willing to take a longer return and potentially less of a return, knowing that it's still important, but they are going to get a return. So there's different ways we can do this, that a lot of these innovations can be funded. I do want to open it up for questions because we've been talking for a long time, and I'm sure there's, I hope, some questions out there. All right, you were first up.
Great. Dr. Bridget, thank you for that example between building a product for rugged terrain versus paved roads. I think that was a great analogy. But how do you balance the risk of building a product for rugged terrain that ultimately, in many cases, just increases the cost? And as those costs increase, the price goes up, your ability to market and sell that product goes down. How do you balance that with, with that mentality of building for ruggedness, but at the same time, it's a lot cheaper to build for a paved road?
Great question, and probably I don't agree. I think it's this is why probably we are innovators. I think what we're doing to ourselves, and there was an example actually about there's somebody built an infant incubator from cardboard. And in a discussion, I got upset about it because as an innovator, we can do better. This is why, we have the probably, talking about, in the United States or within us or as an innovator anywhere around the world. If we squeeze our brains a little bit further than the easy solution, we can actually come up with really innovative methods that it is, as I said, rugged, practical, low cost, but it takes a little more work. And I think this is where, the issue. I'll give you a quick example. We were trying to build the disposable housing. And 4 years ago, I met, a retired CEO from a medical device company. The guy has over 40 years of experience. Through a friend, she managed actually to get me an appointment with him. And he was very generous, and I told him what I'm thinking, and already we've been, doing some work. And he looked at me and said, you know what? You are smart, you have a lot of passion, go home and do something else. And I was like, okay, why? And he said, it's gonna cost you way more than what you think, you know? And I said, okay, so what is the problem? So he explained to me where actually the problems of the R&D, development, partnerships, and so forth. So instead of surrendering for his knowledge, which I respected a lot, but at the same time, I flipped the coin. I said, let me go and study this. And so I went and I really looked very careful, probably because I'm very stubborn too. So I looked very carefully how to actually change the dynamics. And one simple one, when we're designing this whole dome, patented, and it's a completely controlled environment and so forth, we were looking in manufacturing in a very different industry, which in the beginning we went to medical device companies. They started actually designing this and all that, and they quoted us like hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this. And it took me a little while, and then after that, I went to a professor at BU, and he, somebody actually recommended him, and he said, go talk to him. So I went to explain, and he looked at me and he said, you're looking at the wrong industry to develop this. I said, what are you talking about? And he said, go talk to toy development industry. And I was like, I would never think of that. But then, I started thinking, okay, this is what it is. So I went in and I started actually explained why, because they have the know-how and it's very inexpensive, a better product from anybody else. The other ones, they don't know how to do it, so they're going to be very expensive. These guys, they know, so it is very low cost. And eventually, I end up, literally with a product that I was quoted $300, and eventually it becomes, less than probably 10%,
No, that's great.
of that cost.
What other questions do we have? Oh, I see one. Yep. Back there. Will you just talk a little louder? I don't know if we have a mic.
It's hard to hear you until here, so I'm not sure if you touched that point, but what about in terms of market access, with this global access to care, what do you think about places where the access to market is quite, like for Europe, for example, it's every country has a different HTA body, and as a small company, how would you target that point? And I talk about Europe, but same in the different states in the US and the same globally.
Yeah. Chris, you might be best for that one. Did you hear all
So
of it?
I didn't hear all
Okay.
of it, but if you,
How, really how to, Europe has all these different countries, different codes, you have to get into every single one.
Yeah.
Same thing with Africa, same thing, even like you were saying
Yeah.
before, each region in the countries. I mean, as a small company, how do you get into these areas?
yeah, and I think that's a fantastic question where you're trying to, as a small company, capture enough market to stay survivable, and then think about how you scale outside of that company or country, and it can be a real challenge. One of the issues that again gets back to, you need to invest in your relationships, which you can't always do from a central site, but from without having on the ground personnel, is that I think you need to invest in the countries where you're moving into, and even where there's no regulatory body, which is often the countries in Africa. If you're working in India, they're de facto regulations that they'll rely on FDA or CE marking. But to move into these different sectors, you really need a commercial workforce that is local, I think, and try to choose wisely as to where you do that so that you're able to get a viable product and then move to the next. And like in the case of India, moving from one state to the next, and you can actually obtain, say, in one state, a pretty large contract, which we have seen several times, where you'll get a large order, and then it's only after they're viable in that state that they'll move to the next one. But I'm not saying it's easy. That's truly a challenge.
I mean, in partnerships, I mean,
Yeah.
that's very much a really, not an easy way, but an easier way, because they understand the local regulations and laws and cultures and customs that need to be gone through for each of these, each city, each state, each region. And I think, that could help cut costs down, because there's a value for both of them, for both you and the partnership company as well. We are short on time, and I don't want Sarah to give us the hook, which might be in a few seconds. So I just wanted to see from each of you guys, what words of advice do you have for anybody in the space, or anybody innovating, or anybody interested in global healthcare?
I guess one thing is understand your market. And I'm not talking, at one time. Go back several times and have, up on the ground, literally, people who know your product and give you your feedback. And I think this is very important piece that to survive.
Yeah, and building on that, going back to the phase 0 product requirements, what's appropriate for this device to do? That's relevant in global healthcare, and it's relevant everywhere, right? So do the work early, lay the foundation, and you can build on that.
Well, those are great. I agree with both of those, and I just encourage people to go in with humility and think, how much am I going to learn from being in this setting that's going to actually help my company be more efficient and be a better company by using human-centered design, by listening to the people who are going to choose, use, and pay the dues for whatever you're developing.
Yeah, and I echo all of that. I just would challenge everybody to think about how you can merge the profits of your company with some social responsibility as well, and whether that's through partnerships or doing social good, or a different type of innovation model or investment model, that as well. And how can you really develop these devices that are great for investors, great for the world, that are not just incremental changes, true actual innovations that are useful in the places where you want them to go. You need to really transform the healthcare system instead of just like pushing what we know here. And of course, if anyone knows anything about me, I'm going to say focus on women as well. And when women are healthy, especially in a developing country, that means that their family is healthy. That means that they can send their children to school. That also means that they are productive members of society, which then increases the value of the economy, which then has, obviously, money goes back into the healthcare system, which fosters all of the innovation that we're working towards. You need a market. And unfortunately, without healthy women, you're not going to have that. So I thank you. We are all around for questions, and I know we only had time for a quick 2, because we all love to talk. So please come and find us and ask us anything. We'd love to talk to you guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks.